Welcome to the Children First Family Law Podcast. I'm really glad you're all with us today. I'm excited to welcome Christy Bradshaw Schmidt, who is coming to us from the Dallas-Fort Worth, Texas area, and has a lot to share as she has been on the front lines for many, many years as a licensed professional counselor. She does custody evaluations and expert work, and for a long time did therapeutic work, though she's not doing therapy now. But has a lot to help share both with parents and professionals about things to think about in the family law context. So, Christy, welcome. Thanks for doing this with me today.
Thanks for having me. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah. So, as we were prepping for this, talked about first, I want to hear a little bit about how you got into this work. And then I think we will potentially first talk about an audience of parents, right? And parents, what should you be thinking about as you're looking at how to help your children and how to find the right resources of therapists? Because there's certain rights and wrongs in terms of being in a high conflict or any kind of divorce situation, right? So we'll talk about that. And then we're going to pivot a little bit and talk later about what therapists in particular should be thinking about. There's a lot of fear a lot of therapists have about getting involved in these court involved families and whether they should testify and what their notes look like and things like that. So if you're a therapist, maybe listen to the beginning and then fast forward to toward the middle to end of this so you can hear the specific thoughts that Christy can share about what you need to think about in your own practice. So with that, help us understand kind of how you got into this work as opposed to just doing typical therapy.
I fell into this work when I went to grad school 30 years ago. We weren't taught this. This is not the field of study that I even knew existed. If I
Mm.
told you what my grad professor told me to do with my notes if I would subpoena it, it was curl your toes because it's what you're supposed to do.
Mm.
When I got out of grad school, I actually worked initially working in residential treatment, working with adolescents and young adults who struggled with substance abuse and mental health issues. I worked with pregnant and postpartum women who struggled with those similar issues. And then I ended up in inpatient care and day hospital care and working IOP and doing some individual therapy on the side until I got fed up with managed care and
Right.
like do more with less. And so I started looking for a job. And this was back in the day where you looked for a job in the newspaper. That's how old I am.
So how many child custody evaluations do you think you've done?
On a real 600 or a little more.
Yeah. Okay. And what percentage of those do you think just, we didn't talk about this, just spitball it, right? Like what percentage do you think involve a therapeutic recommendation? Meaning, I think you need to get some therapy.
Over 90%
Okay.
for
And
either a child, a
yeah.
parent, both parents, or the entire system. It just depends. But there's got to be when I term referral recommendations, there are always referral recommendations. And if I had to guess, it's 90% have some form of therapeutic component or a parenting coordination component.
Yeah. And I think that's really interesting because I agree. I sound like a broken record. I did these evaluations and still am able to do them in Colorado, but I now have shifted my practice to the best practice attorney role because I find it so much more fulfilling and probative and helpful because I can do all that investigative work, but I can also sit at the table and push and pull and prod and try to get everybody to, get this solved. So, but I when I was a CFI and now, it's in probably 90% of the cases that I recommended therapy. And so I ask you that just to double down on the issue that you can see where now the problem comes because what percentage of therapists do you think are willing to do these cases? I mean, you have anything like of all the therapists in the world, is it 1% of them? Is it 10% of them? It's something far, far lower than we need who are
That's a
equipped to do this.
It's absolutely far for a lower of a percentage. And I didn't major in math for a reason. We have a judge who says math is hard, Judge Willis, and I support that math is hard. But if I look in my community, which Dallas Fort Worth is as large as it is,
Yeah.
I if there's 25 that I would trust, that's a really high number. And obviously that varies from do they treat adults? Do they treat children? Do they treat families? Do they do parent-child? Do they work with families experiencing parent-child contact problems? But it's a low number.
Yeah.
And we
And
have
yeah.
more in Dallas Fort Worth than say Austin has, Houston has very, very few. So
Yeah.
it's an issue, and it's an issue. We've talked about this. I've presented even at AFCC conferences on a national level. It's an issue everywhere from what I'm hearing.
What's the risk of picking somebody? I get this a lot. Like, oh, I found somebody that'll take, especially with wait lists and the few number of people doing this. I mean, it's really hard to get them to hit them at the right time to take these cases. And there's so many more than they can actually take. And so people will just get desperate and they're like, well, I found this other person, or my friend told me this, or I saw this on a Facebook page, or whatever. Is this person okay? If we don't see this, every once in a while, it's like finding a diamond in a pile, right? It's like, oh, well, this person's actually pretty good. I take it back. This person really does have the right, she might need some mentoring or he might need some mentoring, but she's got kind of the right approach to this. What's the risk of going to somebody who says they are court involved or doesn't even say they're court involved? What's the opportunity cost there of going to somebody who isn't going to actually have that correct background?
There's potential for harm to your family and to your child. I don't, that sounds pretty extreme, but that's just what it is. Because if you're going in and you're taking your child to a therapist, if they think it's okay just to talk to you and not include the other parent, that's a red flag. Because when that individual gets on the witness stand and they've heard one side of the story and they've believed one side of the story 100%, that is ripe for cross-examination because they're not considering that a child's life, it's a puzzle, right? And that child is half mom, half dad, half mom, half dad, however their family structure is set up. And if you leave one part of that out, that's a big gaping hole in your assessment of that child or that family. And so part of it is you've got to have somebody who's not going to believe, this sounds horrible, not going to believe everything their client tells you. And, so if you're the parent, they're not going to believe everything they tell you. It doesn't mean they're not, that you're not a trustworthy person who's talking to them, but they really need to go, okay, so that's your side. Because there's always two sides to every story. So that's your side of the story. They've just got to wonder what's the other side of the story and what's this child telling me if they're treating the child, and is what the child telling me true, or is their experience of the world kind of tainting what they're seeing because their life experience is so limited at that point. You want people who are really able to think and consider outside of just what they're hearing in their office, what else might be going on. And you really want therapists who aren't focusing on telling you that your ex is a narcissist or your ex is a borderline. If you're in individual therapy as a parent, you want somebody who's going, okay, so let's say that's what's going on. How do I help you deal with that? Because at the end of the day, we can't control what our co-parent's doing. We can't control what our co-parent's doing with our child. We can control what we do in response to that. And you need therapists who are helping you or your child learn the coping skills to manage their life and their circumstances. That's both parenting in a single parent home after a separation or divorce, co-parenting a child after a separation or divorce, or just helping a child learn to manage that transition between two homes and having two houses. It's all about coping skill development. It's not about blame. And if you've got a therapist who wants to take up their torch for you and go to court and advocate for you, that's a red flag because that's not their job. Their job is to help you cope with what's going on. And if they have to go to court, it's educate the court on what's going on.
How does that generally work? I know a lot of this involves ethics rules because therapists are usually state by state, and unless there's a few exceptions, they have to work within their state. But what are the ethics of that, and what should parents be looking for ideally?
I mean, ideal world, if the money's there, and that's always the problem, right? Or do these families have the money to pay for it? Ideally, especially if you have parent-child contact problems and there's resistance or refusal in a parent-child relationship, ideally you have a family therapist, and each member of that family has a therapist. Sometimes you even have a parenting coordinator. And the goal is they're all talking regularly, not all doing what we call siloed work in their own little world. There
Mhm.
needs to be communication. You need it. Sometimes the head of that team is your family therapist. Sometimes the head of that team is your uh, parenting coordinator. Just depends. But that's perfect world. And I don't think any of us really live in a perfect
Yeah.
world. I think from there, it really depends on the facts of your case. If you have a child who's really struggling and has significant either mental health issues or coping skills issues, or they're just really struggling to function, that's your go-to. That's your first therapist, is to get somebody to help that child who is going to include both parents equally. And if they're not going to include them equally, there's transparency as to why. Everybody knows, hey, I'm bringing mom in because there was an issue at mom's house about some discipline thing this weekend. I'll keep you
Right.
posted on how it goes, or vice versa, issue at the other parent's home. So the transparency is key. And that doesn't mean
Yeah.
we're outing everything the kid's telling us. It
Mhm.
just means if I'm meeting with one parent more than the other, they know why. It's not a secret. I'm not doing it behind somebody's back to cause people to wonder if somebody's gotten in cahoots with somebody else. Because that's all there's a lot of distrust when people separate and are getting divorced, and that adds to that. And then if you've got a parent who's got a mental health issue or substance abuse issue or bad behavior, then that's the person who needs the therapist. And maybe it's one parent has a therapist and one kiddo, and then that one parent's involved in the child's, that other parent's involved in that child's therapy. It really is case by case. You've just kind of got to triage your case and meet the needs that, where's the most bleeding? I hate to say it that way, but that's what you're
Yeah.
looking for. And where do I start? I start there and then work my way out to who else needs help.